Oi, alright. I'm Grant. This is DoodleReview. I'm out here working to give you non-stop daily music content and reviews on all types of music. We've got new stuff, old stuff, and other stuff. This week, there's new stuff from PJ Harvey, Grian Chatten, Big Freedia, Jess Williamson, and Baxter Dury. And old stuff from Tame Impala, Planes, No Age, Open Mike Eagle, Nicholas Craven, and Boldy James. Reason for a lot of the stuff from last year is I'm about to go on holiday for a bit, so I thought I'd dig through the archive, give you some favourites that came out last year, as well as a bit of Tame Impala, because I'm putting together an album ranking for them, which I think will be pretty cool. Heading to Ireland for a week, and in that time planning to drink a bunch of Guinness and check out some, hopefully hear a ton of live music, all the way from various pubs from Cork to Killarney to Dublin. So I'll let you know how that goes. And then between then and now, hopefully got to try and hit up a cinema to get some Barbenheimer action. After all that work I did putting together a playlist, need to actually see the freaking film, so we'll let you know how that goes. A lot of stuff trying to happen between now and then, so we're gonna see how it goes. Alright, onward. I always feel like jumping into an artist's discography 30 years in offers a kind of a double-edged sword of a perspective, because on one hand you kind of take the music at first face value with no love for their previous work colouring your opinion, but on the other you miss out on the joy of kind of connecting those dots of an artistic evolution over multiple albums. Not having an attachment to Harvey's previous work, which is something I plan to change in the future, is just one of actually a couple of obstacles I had when approaching Eye Inside the Old Year Dying, as the album is deeply rooted in English heritage, specifically West Country English heritage, and features an abundance of esoteric language, despite obviously being English and actually hailing from an area not too far from Dorset, the region from which Harvey draws a lot of inspiration for this album. I have absolutely no interest in this aspect of culture. I find rural English tradition, history and culture totally, utterly and painfully boring and completely at odds with where I'm at in my life. And that's before we start layering in the oldie English colloquialisms and words that just don't make sense. Seriously, the amount of times Wordle, which is apparently an old West Country translation of the word world, is used in the lyrics is kind of mind-numbing. So with all that said, then how could it be that I actually love this record? It speaks volumes to PJ Harvey's vision and skill that she could take all of these subjects that I generally turn my snobby city boy nose up to and sculpt this record into something that is just utterly enchanting. The production and the arrangements to each track are stark but incredibly rich in texture. The distorted piano backing the doo-doo melody on the opener, Prayer at the Gate, to the guitar played so delicately you can hear the pick dragging against the strings, creating these tiny little harmonics on Seen Am I. This is a record you can get lost in. Ultimately, I'm too dull to really understand the theme of the record from its lyrics, and the word choice I think is often frustratingly esoteric, as I mentioned, yet something about this music connects with me emotionally. In 20 years, when I start thinking, fedora or pork pie hats are a good idea and I'm walking through the meadows, God help me, but maybe I might even come around to the lyrics then as well. It almost seems too early in the career of Fontaines DC for members to be going off doing solo projects, but in the 4 short years since the band's first record, it's been pretty easy to call that frontman Grian Chatten's respect and care for his words may at some point require more than just one outlet. Although the style of music through which these additional poetic dispatches would be conveyed was not so easy to call. Would Chatten opt for a stripped back acoustic folk singer-songwriter approach, a minimal beats and spoken word vibe, or something completely unexpected? The answer to all of these questions is actually no. While Chaos for the Fly isn't a million miles from a Fontaines album, just by nature of the fact that all of the songs are embellished with full band instrumentation and of course hold Chatten's distinctive, monotonous but sensitive drawl at the centre, it does have its own, often very wistful spirit. The lyrics utilise a variety of real and metaphorical devices over the course of the record to speak about the themes of love, death, and most interestingly, struggle. struggle, it seems, to quell a small but loud, sometimes inner voice that would lead our protagonist into destructive vices, like in the song Bob's Casino, or a voice of anger towards hangers-on that tried to convince you that you might share their flaws. And in reading Chatten's interviews, he explains that songwriting helps him to exorcise demons, or as he puts it, blow poison into a bottle, seal the bottle and put it on a shelf. And those songs I mentioned really clicked a lot more when I heard that, and as I listened more, I felt a share in that writer's catharsis, even without knowing the exact situation of which he's writing about. That all sounds heavy, but sometimes Chatten just hits you with some poetry, as with Salt Thrower Off a Truck, that doesn't need to do much more than it does, which is just conjure some beautiful imagery and let you walk around in it for a minute. I've heard the word timeless used to describe the music, and since then I've kind of pained myself to try and find an alternative, but honestly it's a pretty apt description. Dan Carey's production finds a way to give every song kind of exactly what it's needed, be that a guitar and a fiddle simply on that Salt Throwers song, or more sophisticated but subtle arrangements that lift you to a completely dreamlike plane, as with East Coast Bed. I think this is a fantastic album that I think might actually have connected with me deeper and faster than any Fontaine's album to date. For me, it's a straight 8 out of 10. Despite being one of the prominent artists in bounce music, a New Orleans originated subgenre of hip hop, this is only Big Freedia's second album, the first since 2014. Considering that the guardrails to keep music within the framework of bounce are pretty tight, like you need a call and response, you need hypnotic repeated vocal samples, and you need a beat based around the classic Triggerman sample, Central City does a fairly good job of keeping things just dynamic enough for a full-length album. The record starts with a classic bounce track in the shape of Central City Freestyle, but after that we quickly get a feature to freshen things up with some hyphy flavours from Kamaya. This is a pattern we see throughout Central City, with Freedia delivering one or two stereotypical bounce tracks and then following this up with a guest, be that Lil Wayne or Ciara or even Faith Evans. Despite the dynamism these artists introduce, the album always is fighting an uphill battle against the setting that you're listening to it in. On one hand, it's the perfect soundtrack to get you hyped for a house party or even pre-drinking for a night out, but trying to listen to it while doing anything that requires your attention or concentration will end up getting you slightly enraged by the bounce repetition of a track like Booty Like a Drummer. To some degree, that's on the listener though. You should know what you're getting when you're listening to a Big Freedia record, and just listen appropriately. Overall, this record is a lot of fun when you're in the mood, but it could be leaner by nixing, the Pepto interlude and bumping either Nola Babies or Gin in My System, as they're essentially the same song. These changes would have made the record just a touch tighter and more enjoyable as a whole. For me, I would give this a 6 out of 10. I didn't learn about Jess Williamson until her excellent collaborative album with Waxahachie called Planes, which we'll get to later on in this episode. It came out last year, and having loved that record, I knew I definitely needed to jump on any new Williamson material when it eventually came out. Time Ain't Accidental's theme is that of feeling dejected when something comes crashing down that you assumed would be forever, feeling like you squandered a rare opportunity, but finding acceptance and ultimately happiness when you find yourself in the right place at the right time to start something new. While these are pretty well-trodden country breakup album tropes, there are several production flourishes that keep the songs feeling fresh between the ballads. Some of my favourite tracks here, like the title track and Topanga 2-Step, utilise really basic drum machine percussion that make the brighter melodies pop and sparkle even more. This is definitely worth a look if you heard that Planes record last year, or if you like Casey Musgrave or even, dare I say it, Taylor Swift. This is a solid solo singer-songwriter album, 7 out of 10, do go check it out. I've been a fan of Baxter Dury since 2017's Prince of Tears, and while he could have addressed this topic in the albums prior and I've just missed it, I Thought I Was Better Than You, his new and 8th record, represents the first time since I've been a fan that I've heard him so directly address the unique perspective of his upbringing as a son of a famous and somewhat iconic English rock star. Ian Dury, Baxter's father, was famous for his abrasive yet catchy and often hilarious Cockney beat poetry and song, made famous alongside the eclectic music he made with backing from the punk, new wave and ska-tinged blockheads. A band that briefly featured Wilko Johnson on guitar among many other British greats. Following in the footsteps, living in the shadow, or living up to his father's legacy has never seemed to faze Baxter, even when creating music that, while certainly is its own thing, definitely bears many of the Dury trademarks. However, on Better Than You, we now hear the weight of that name from multiple standpoints. Whether it's feeling entitled on Celebrate Me, or being treated differently in childhood on Standout Leon, or Shadow, which features the slightly devastating lyrics, even though you want to be like Frank Ocean, but you don't sound like him, you just sound like Ian. These are heavy themes that, while not immediately universal due to the fame angle, certainly hold a kernel of truth that does resonate for most of questioning your place, your contribution, and even what you're good at. However, being a Baxter Dury record, this is delivered with typical dry wit, surrealism, and humour, making it always a really fun listen. I love this album. It's an 8 out of 10. Currents marked a watershed moment for the Tame Impala project. It retained the same exploratory approach to arrangements and, of course, Parker's knack for sweet, hooky vocals, but in this case, trading those phased 70s psychedelic guitar riffs for a more synth and electronic-driven project. The stylistic shift, for reasons I'm not so sure about, also seemed to allow Kevin Parker to level up his songwriting capabilities. Suddenly, on this album, while songs could still be long and even still, be driven by a repeated phrase or a riff, the progressions would actually resolve to a satisfying chorus or bridge. And examples of those include Eventually, The Less I Know The Better, or 'Cause I'm a Man. Complete speculation here on my part, but I wonder if this evolution could be due to the fact that more of the song ideas originated from a keyboard than a guitar, as on previous albums. That's just a guess though. I feel like this now classic album is a perfect musical manifestation of the trials and tribulations of navigating relationships in your late 20s. The genre shift, while it may have left fans of the more classic prog rock era that came before it a little betrayed, really paid off, and dressing his beat-centric compositions in layers and layers of syrupy synths became the perfect pairing to some of the hookiest bass lines ever committed to tape. I think this is a classic. It may be a little baggy in parts, but I think it's totally worthy of a 9 out of 10. Speaking of Jess Williamson, as we were earlier, I thought it'd be good to re-review the album Planes, the collaboration between Katie Crutchfield, aka Waxahachie, and Jess Williamson herself. I wasn't familiar with Williamson at the time this album came out, and without knowing the split of writing responsibilities behind the scenes, it seems based purely on those that Williamson takes lead vocals on, that she here is carrying the more mellow, slow-burning tracks. Songs like Summer Sun and Bella Fatima weren't initially grabbing me in comparison to the Crutchfield fronted tracks like Problem With It and Line of Sight, which are undeniably country bangers. However, these moments do contribute to a well-balanced and really engaging album. Not considering myself a country fan overall, this album really caught me by surprise and I found it highly enjoyable, and I definitely think that anyone that's just remotely interested in folk or pop or any guitar-based solo singer-songwriter music should check it out. It's definitely a 7 out of 10 for me. I first heard of the band No Age in 2008-2009 around the release of their seminal garage art noise rock album Nouns. The band and that specific album always remind me now of autumn of that year, kind of walking through wet, leafy scenes to and from college, or sometimes work at the cafe that I used to work at. For some reason, those associations have always stuck, and every subsequent No Age album, whether or not it suits the season, just sounds better in autumn. People Helping People is the band's 6th album, and what has surprised me most is that this time I've found the abstract droney instrumental songs to be the most engaging. Whether it's Opener You're Cooked, Interdependence, or Blueberry Barefoot, something about the heavily affected guitars just puts me in a trance and I can instantly daydream. That's not to say that the vocal tracks here aren't also good. They give you everything you'd expect if you're a fan of the two-piece, like borderline spoken word singing, angular guitar riffs, and all of it sounding like the mics were positioned in the room next door to where the band's playing. Highlights of those tracks include Violence, Slow Motion Shadow, and Tripped Out Before Scott. I would give this album a 6 out of 10. A new album from Open Mike Eagle is always a treat. His dry, self-deprecating wit mixed with a high level of nerdery really appeals to me. Component System is another great entry in what is becoming a fantastic discography. There are a lot of topics covered over the course of the album's 14 tracks, but the overarching theme seems to be Mike generally musing on the disparity between critical acclaim and commercial success, which motivates a number of reflective but dryly funny tracks. Specifically, I Retired, Then Changed My Mind. The beats here come from a wide variety of producers but are curated with great taste. Highlights include a Madlib number, Circuit City, and For Doom, which is produced by Illingsworth. Musically and lyrically, a great tribute to the legendary supervillain rapper. I've also actually recently learned that these songs are also constructed on samples of tapes that Mike made growing up, taping stuff off of underground rap stations, which I think is really cool. I think it doesn't, for me, touch Anime, Trauma and Divorce, but it's a really enjoyable listen, and I would give it a 6 out of 10. When Fair Exchange No Robbery came out, it was only a few months after Boldy James' last great record, Killing Nothing. And at this point, he came back again with a full collaboration with Canadian producer Nicholas Craven. In the same way that Pusha T leaves nothing unsaid when it comes to his favourite topic of shifting bricks, Boldy James equally doesn't pull any punches. These are gritty coke raps backed by beats that feel like the score to some lost 70s gangster flick. The samples used throughout Fair Exchange are both flawless and timeless. Stuck in Traffic is full of sweeping strings, punctuated by 70s Superfly wah guitar. Scrabble has an addictive vocal hook against a warm 70s organ. It all just flows together seamlessly, weaving a rich tapestry of Detroit underworld double crosses and alliances. It's an amazing album. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. Cool, well, alright, I hope you enjoyed this week's reviews. We've got a lot more stuff coming down the pike for you. I'm going to be dropping a breakdown of the music in the Bear as well as the Tame Impala album ranking, so keep your eyes peeled. Peace!